Nathaniel Lee is who you want by your side in the courtroom. You've seen the rest, now hire the best. Contact Lee, Cosell, and Feigley today. And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is an important day in American history. It's beginning of the election season, which is going to be one of the most historical elections in American history. Today, we have our superstar panel with Attorney Banks, Masters in Tax, cybersecurity expert, research analyst, Primes, former U.S. attorney in the Cleveland area, assistant U.S. attorney, worked for the federal government, the government lawyer for most of his career. And of course, the famous Milton Grimes, Representative Rodney King, one of the most historical cases in American history. But today we start on a sad note. If you watched the news, about 12 days ago, we had massive rain and flooding in Indiana. This resulted in a catastrophic loss to the residents, particularly all across the state, but in Lake County. The city of Gary, which is an African-American primary population, has not had water nor electricity for almost 2 weeks.
Wow.
We have not seen that federal organization called FEMA intervene to help these residents. We see nonprofit reaching out, trying to help people. And American democracy, at one point in time, we had a federal agency that helped people in time of need. But unfortunately, we see a radical departure from this important function of the federal government. You know, citizens could chip in, but citizens don't have billions of dollars to spend to fix what is a human tragedy that's occurred in our northwest part of our state, folks. So this highlights the importance of voting. And but Marlon, what the heck happened? Why do we have such a breakdown in our federal government? You know, you represent the government. Is there any justification for this?
Well, hey, good morning, everyone, fellow panelists and your audience. Nathaniel, certainly a pleasure to be here today. And certainly my heart and prayers go out to those that are impacted. But I think your audience, Nathaniel, has to understand that this is, obviously, an act of God. But the other part of it is man-made in terms of the response to it. As many of your listeners will recall, the current administration proposed really changing the dynamic as relates to the FEMA in terms of disaster relief. And what they did is try to cut a number of the federal workforce that were involved in this important federal agency. And they indicated that they wanted to shift that focus from the federal government to the states. And the problem is that, states don't have the resources or coordination that the federal government can have. And the federal government, can have a national strategy. And oftentimes these particular national disasters, they don't, have an origin in one particular city or one particular state. They may move across multiple states. So people have to understand this is a result of policy choices. And finally, it's important to indicate that there was a fairly recent litigation and where the United States administration, they admitted that they were withholding funds in terms of research dollars, in terms of assistance, not based on merit, but based upon the perception of who that state voted for. Right. And you look at NBC News and a number of other, organizations that reported that. Milton, you could attest, those are claims that have been brought forth in California. And if you look at it, California is a creditor state. They provide more money to the federal government than many other states who provide less than they receive.
Right.
And what we saw in terms of, California is that the administration was dragging their feet in terms of making these payments. So we have to understand, yes, these are part of an act of God, but a lot of it is part of policy choices that we need to be, made aware of and need to rectify.
My question is, Marlon, I understand what you're saying, but is Gary a predominantly Black city?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And would that be that Gary may not have shown the required support of the administration that some places have, even though it's in a red state? Could that be part of the reasoning behind it with none funding and none help?
Well, that's part of the allegations that have been made, not only in your state, but in other states. And, recently the administration admitted that there was no basis for withholding, monies in terms of grants, research, and all the other things. So it's problematic. But you go ahead, Milton.
And it has come out, though, that the administration got caught with their pants down and had to confess to the fact that they're withholding some of these funds or cutting off funds because the people didn't vote and support the administration, not because of any meritorious reason.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's been shown and asserted that federal funds are being withheld to states like California and other blue states in retaliation for in retaliation by the administration. Now,
Right.
on Thursday, the Indiana governor requested a expedited major disaster declaration from FEMA, so we will see what happens. It's my understanding that it ordinarily takes 5 to 7 days for such requests to be, quote, processed, which is shameful. And so he is looking for a determination to be made in the very near future, hopefully by Monday. It's my understanding, Nate, that there is state aid available to citizens that have been impacted by the severe storms of August 11, and that resources include $5,000 for food and other necessities. And I've also read that the Trump administration has approved $5 million, which, of course, is nothing. It's
Right.
my understanding that the storm losses that have resulted in, it's my understanding, 95% power outages in Gary, Indiana alone, that those storm losses across the state could exceed $5 billion. So hopefully that declaration is forthcoming quickly, and that those funds will be expeditiously deployed to the state of Indiana.
Well,
You
here's
know,
the problem.
it's
Here's the
hard to
problem.
imagine. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it takes 2 weeks almost for this government to try to step in to rescue this human suffering. It's insulting, quite frankly. This flood problem was rarely known about 2 weeks ago. It was a terrible rainstorm, and we had different parts of the state. None was worse than Northwest Indiana. And we have seen a historically slow response. We've seen great citizens, volunteers, donate, doing all they can to help the people that are in need. But it's such a great amount of human suffering. Like, when you lose your power, folks, you lose your ability to cook food, for example. What happened to your refrigerator? All your food spoils. So all the food that you purchase from the stores, it goes bad. Oh, by the way, if you had an electric stove, for example, how do you cook? Well, you
Doesn't work.
can't cook. And then, so I talked to one of my clients yesterday. They went out and rented a generator, and they were very fortunate. But the problem is they don't have water, so they have to go and buy water for cooking. And Lord knows, I was jokingly saying, so what do you do about bathing? I mean, you know, it's some of the basic necessities of life, human life. So we're seeing this unnecessary suffering. It just angers me that we could have such a lackadaisical response by a state and federal government. It's just not acceptable.
We don't have a rural farming community we're talking about here. We're talking about city dwellers and town dwellers, people who are dependent on going to the store damn near every day, who's dependent upon electricity and the water system, and is cut off from them. I saw in the papers, I think a day ago or 2 days ago, this ship out at sea had lost its power for 4 days. They had no food, they had no meals, they had no sewage, and it was picturing chaos, an American ship, warship that was without power. They finally got them to port and was able to feed them. But I was imagining being out at sea, you think, well, they got all that water out there, what's the problem? And you just dump the sewage in the ocean. It's not that easy. And I can imagine that living in a city here, even in LA, if they cut all my resources, and it could be a problematic with our citizens after a few days of people's, fighting for survival almost. It's scary. It's scary that he plays with our lives like this.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, I hope and pray that the problem is fixed, but there are so many different topics. But Milton, give me an update. You had this case in LA that's also reprehensible to me about the whistleblower case. Explain to us what's going on. And because you got the second largest city in the United States, and it just seemed like that you guys are making a very poor decision in your prosecutorial office.
Well, Mr. Nathaniel Lee, can I read you from the horse's mouth, they say, so that I'm not mistaken? It basically, the DA has agreed to, because of public pressure, the mayor and other organizations behind her has put pressure, like, what the heck are you doing? This officer was out doing a civic duty, and he was protecting the public, but this DA took off on his own. So let me read it real quickly.
Well, explain to us the context as to why this is so important. What the hell was he doing?
He recorded statements by his fellow officers who were on a committee to select trainees for the police department. And so he recorded them secretly. They didn't know he was recording, and he had 90-some of these recordings. The DA charged him with 16 felonies. This ends up with the DA is saying, and it's supposed to happen yesterday, but I couldn't read where it happened at, that the DA was going to agree that he could partake in a diversion program. And at the end of the diversion program, where he complies with some conditions such as community labor or working at a homeless place or something like that, then they would let him withdraw, not require a plea, but they would dismiss the charges. There'd be no criminal record of him, but he has to complete the conditions of the diversion. So the DA is going to require him to do something, and that doesn't settle the fact that he went after this guy for doing a public service, a necessary public service.
Well, wait a second. He's not going to prosecute the corrupt cop that allowed this blatant racial discrimination process to go forward? Nothing happened to them?
He ain't saying nothing about that. Can I read this to you, please, sir?
Go ahead.
So that I'm not mistaken. A Los Angeles police officer who faced multiple felonies for recording his colleagues making racist, sexist, and homophobic comments probably will avoid jail time under an agreement with the prosecutors, LA County's district attorney said Wednesday. District Attorney Nathan Hotchman announced that he would reduce 16 felony eavesdropping counts against Officer Daniel Flores to misdemeanors, and that the case probably would resolve in court through a diversion agreement. The announcement came after Hotchman faced backlash from the decision to prosecute Flores, with the LA Mayor Karen Bass and even some of his own prosecutors criticizing the filing as, quote, insane, end of quote, and a deterrent for police looking to expose corruption and misconduct within their ranks. The district attorney acknowledged the public reaction to the case as he spoke downtown Wednesday morning and said he wanted to make crystal clear, end of quote. His intentions were to blunt illegal investigative practices by police rather than discourage cops who want to report bad behavior. Quote, the message was not being clearly interpreted about us being protective of whistleblowers, he said. Flores attorney, former okay. Following this disposition, 16 felonies will be dismissed with no plea, no punishment, and no record, because Daniel Flores told the troubling truth about what he heard inside his own department. You can say what you want, but it's going to be a chilling effect on officers in situations where they think they could get charged with a crime, even a misdemeanor, and definitely a felony. So it's chilling effect upon law enforcement that officers feel they can't be a whistleblower on their fellow officers for misconduct.
Hey, Marlon, could the federal government they used to have a civil rights division. I mean, wouldn't this the type of thing the federal government used to take over?
Yes, I mean, certainly, one of the things that was a hallmark of the Department of Justice were the various task force that went and did on-site investigations to see there was pattern and practice that deprived individuals of rights. And if we've talked in prior shows, there's certainly been an eradication at the Department of Justice. Instead of, looking towards that prior mission, now you're seeing a priority in terms of reverse discrimination, alleged reverse discrimination. And in fact, many of those consent decrees that were inked and completed under President Obama and Biden, now there's an attempt to kind of pull out of those particular cases. So, I think it would have been a different result had we had a different administration. It just goes to your point, Nathaniel, that voting does have consequences.
Attorney Banks, why is it that the organization, you were former president of National Bar, why haven't they been outspoken on this issue? I was just curious.
On this issue that we're discussing with respect to this whistleblower issue?
Yes.
I will be honest that the National Bar Association at this time is focused on election protection and ensuring that all citizens in the United States are able to exercise their fundamental right to vote during the upcoming midterm elections. I am not aware of what, at this point, how the National Bar Association is responding to this particular issue. And let me just kick this back to Milton. Are you aware, Milton, if in California any National Bar Association affiliate chapters might be engaged in responding to this issue?
Have heard completely nothing from the National Bar Association regarding the benefit from this exposure of, I don't know how many officers this involved, but a number of different officers who are going to be vetted for being police officers. And you would think that an organization that should be interested in civil rights of its citizens, whether they're in California or New York or Illinois or Indiana or Ohio, would be interested in not letting this go unaddressed by them to show police officers that they're going to be supported if they see something they feel is inappropriate going on in their departments. It's not kosher to me for an organization that represents the rights of our citizens, all of our citizens, white or black, not speaking out on an issue like this.
I would also say that as leaders of the National Bar Association, each of us, Nathaniel, Marlon, and Milton, have an obligation to speak out against this issue. And we are um, flagging this issue through this discussion today,
Okay.
using this platform to create awareness and, our position as bar leaders on this particular issue.
But I think also too, and I think that's really true. And I just think it's just worth mentioning that not only us, but also, your audience, Nathaniel, you have the power as well. A number of these cities, they ask for applications for these Citizens Review Commission. And I encourage people to kind of take a look at that and, apply for that. Make that an important issue when politicians are asking for your vote in terms of police reform. And finally, I'll just mention that one of the great quotes of that I'm paraphrasing from Johnny Cochran is that he indicated that police officers hold, one of the most powerful positions in our, judicial system because they have the right to make a decision about life or death, for good or for bad.
Yep.
And so if we have a situation where someone is behaving badly and giving any inference that they're not going to treat people fairly, that should escalate to the top of everyone's agenda. Because the reality of it is, if a police officer with the power that we know officers have is disparaging one group, what's to say that somebody else is not going to be disparaged, subsequently? We need to make sure that people are even-handed. And if there's evidence that they're not, everyone has an obligation to come forward. And a police officer that identifies that unequal treatment should not be prosecuted, should be lauded, because you cannot hold that information in and allow unconstitutional policing to take place.
One of the ICE officers who was involved in the killing of a citizen, I won't say suspect, a citizen, his family rushed forward saying he should never have been an officer. This man had numerous mental illness episodes that would have disqualified him before any amateur panel. He should never have been hired and put on the street with a gun and a badge to arrest people.
Okay, Imhotep, you had a question coming for us. Go ahead.
All right. Good morning, grand rising to everyone. And thank you for taking my call. Boy, I tell you, you guys have brought the flamethrower and the claymores and bouncing betties this morning. I mean, man, the M60s. Wow. Where do I start? John Roberts. I know you probably was going to get to that. I'm going to make a quick comment on that. John Roberts it's ridiculous. I mean, we have a Supreme Court that has been thoroughly bought off, compromised. There is no ethics when it comes to the higher echelon. Think about what the ethics that I'm a healthcare professional. I can't take a dime from a patient. I can't take 1/4 from a patient. You guys know what under your profession, the ethical standards that you have to be under. Yet the Supreme Court has no ethical standards on paperwork. Attorney Price, I'm sure you can verify this. Me and my mother talked about it. I thought I looked it up. You all do, in the Justice Department did, but the Supreme Court doesn't. And so Roberts, that decision yesterday, we're letting this fool Trump continue this ballroom crap. Roberts, my dad worked with his father at Bethlehem Steel. Okay, I mean his dad. You ought to know that John Roberts' dad worked at Bethlehem Steel. My dad worked with him. My father was an engineer there. And it's just befuddled me how he has lost all logic and reason when it comes to this. And it's only because he's been bought off. It has to be. Number two, the evidence, Milton, you should like this. All the new evidence coming out in the Carmelo Anthony case that his hearings and appeal hearings been going on about the young man that he stabbed in self-defense. 300 incidences of bullying people. A girl had already filed a complaint that he was stalking her and trying to physically harm her. None of this was allowed out in his trial because we know that the setup was in because he was friends with the prosecution and the judge and stuff like that. You see that they made sure they recused that original judge from these hearings. He was very upset about that. So hopefully Carmelo can get proper justice and get out of there. As far as Gary's concerned, my hometown in Northwest Indiana, my region, Attorney Banks, Commonwealth Edison's been over there helping. That's probably been the only outside company because I've heard from electrical workers, electricians and electrical line workers from Iowa, Wisconsin, and other places who have called NIPSCO and offered their help. NIPSCO has turned them down. NIPSCO has turned them down. NIPSCO does not want to incur the cost to house or pay overtime and this and the third. They've turned the help down. That is detrimental, especially along with the governor being late with the FEMA request, because once FEMA would have been authorized, then all that extra money would have been paid from the federal government under the disaster declaration. But up until that point, NIPSCO has turned down the help. The only outside electrical organization has been ComEd because they're right across the border. Period. It's really it's really a shame. This country talks about being so great and grand, and this China's right now testing a bullet train that'll go 400 kilometers an hour. 400. Former President Obama begged this country to upgrade the grid to get renewables, bullet trains, rail, high-speed rail. They don't want to do anything. They want people reliant on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is dead. I'm telling you all right now, I'm setting up a whole solar system in my home. So I'm not worried about a Generac that uses natural gas, because if natural gas is gone, the Generac's not going to work. But we have solar. And solar, they cannot block out the sun. So I implore everybody to get solar. And then lastly, with this voting that went on in Florida, there's 335,000 eligible black voters in I don't know if that's black voters. That could have been black. I'm going on Luther Campbell's numbers. Because we saw Debbie Wasserman Schultz win that election down there in that county. Thanks to Angie Nixon, we applaud her. Great. I like her, what she did on TV all week long, blasting people. But going to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that county, that area, district, is majority black. And according to Luther Campbell, there's 334,000 eligible voters in that district. Only 54,000 voted. Only 54,000 voted. I watched him talk about it after the election. 334,000 eligibles, only 54,000 voted. This has got to stop. Now, a lot of comments are talking about people dissuaged, the disillusion. They don't like both parties and the third. My comment was, somebody's going to rule. Somebody is going to have the power of the pen. If you don't take part, someone's going to get that pen. Someone's going to be in charge. I don't understand. What can be done to get these disillusioned people to understand somebody is going to be a winner in any and all of these races? So not voting is not an option. That is pitiful. 54,000 out of 334,000 eligible. That is preposterous. Now let's see your comments off here. Thank you.
I lost my picture, Nate. It says that the host will admit you when they're.
We can't hear you, Milton.
Go ahead. Milton?
Yes?
I lost your voice. Go ahead.
Okay, I said I've lost my picture. It says the host will admit me when you're ready, connecting.
We see you.
We see you, Milton.
Okay.
Well, there was a whole lot to unpack from our callers' comments. There were comments regarding the Carmelo Anthony case and the request for a new trial, and arguments were heard last Thursday and Friday, and the judge will render a decision on the request for a new trial by Monday, which is the mandated time frame, or that option will be lost. I'm interested in our criminal lawyers' views on the arguments that are being made that if in that case, and as you know, Carmelo Anthony was convicted of murdering a student, a fellow student at a track meet, and has been convicted of murder and sentenced to 35 years in prison for that fatal stabbing of a
Okay, I'm gonna have to call back, Nate, because I'm getting
No,
feedback.
just hang up one of your phones.
Yeah, I'm gonna hang up. I'm
Just
not
hang
on the
up
phone.
one.
I'm gonna hang up.
Just one.
Can I call back, please?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're fine now. After you hung up one, you're fine.
okay, I'm okay. Okay, whatever.
Okay, go ahead.
Back to the Camilo Anthony case where um, Anthony was convicted of murder back in June and sentenced to 35 years in prison for the fatal stabbing of another student at a high school track meet. His lawyers are arguing that um, Carmelo Anthony didn't testify at the trial in his own defense, and that was due to a quote, gentleman's agreement not to introduce character evidence in the case and to only focus on what happened during the day of the track meet. And so it's my understanding that there are allegations of waiver of the quote Wallen rule in this situation. And so I'm interested in our criminal lawyers' views on these innovative arguments that are being made to justify a new trial in the Anthony case. Lawyers' views.
Okay, you covered. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just not satisfied with this communication. In a way, Benita, you cover a number of issues there. I'll start at the end and go backwards, and that is the judge deciding without having a hearing on sentencing, if you recall, what the sentence was going to be for this young man. Am I right? That,
I
yeah,
didn't follow the case, Milton. I don't know.
okay,
I had my own battle. I had two trials back to back. So
okay, well, that I followed it to that degree, and as to him, well, I'm gonna just speak bluntly as to a defendant testifying in a murder case one-on-one. The court, the jury, people want to know what happened. What motivated you to do this? I don't. It's hard to just sit there and say I stabbed a man so many times and no explanation or justification or reason is given for it, and you expect that the interpretation of those facts are going to be to your benefit if you don't have a narrative for your act. You know, I agree that a person has a right not to testify, but sometimes a testimony is required to explain your conduct if the conduct may appear to be excessive or unnecessary. So I really hate to criticize another lawyer's decision not to put his client on the stand, but it troubles me in some situations that the reason why I did something or my client did something is not given to the decision maker, and in this case, a jury. Not saying that it would have been helpful in this case, but just as a lawyer doing trial work in a number of criminal cases, including death penalty, sometimes we have to set aside our Fifth Amendment right and explain to people What happened?
What's being argued at this point is that there was a gentleman's agreement between the prosecution and the defense not to admit evidence of each of the boys or teenagers' prior conduct and character. And that may have impacted Mr. Anthony's decision not to testify on his own behalf.
That may be, Vanita, and I may be wrong in my assessment of this situation, but I don't know that I would have made that agreement when you say that this boy has had how many? 300, the victim had 300 bullying incidents. I don't know if you can get that in if the attacker, if the defendant didn't know about it, but I'm having a struggle here with the lawyering in this case. I got to cut off because I'm getting the feedback here and it's not.
Yeah, go ahead. And then,
Okay, I'll be back.
Yeah, I would agree with Milton that it's certainly a difficult decision to determine whether or not a criminal defendant, is going to testify at trial. And, I was not there, but I think one of the things you have to look at, and that's the role of the lawyer, is to see if you're ahead or behind. Now, constitutionally, a criminal defendant does not have to testify, and the prosecutor cannot comment on that. But as the attorney, you have to weigh, in looking at the evidence that the prosecution has put forth, as Milton says, do you need to make an explanation? And that's why it's important not only have that lawyer there, but to have somebody at your side that's looking at the jury reaction. And, if it appears, based upon your experience that, hey, the jury wants an explanation, then I think you want to provide it to them. And, given that there's, very probative evidence that we're seeing that was potentially available to go to the issue of self-defense, it certainly is concerning that, perhaps that decision wasn't made. And you have a young person, this is his livelihood. 35 years, that's a lifetime, for somebody that's that young. So these are really substantial decisions. I would hope that that decision was vetted with the criminal defendant, that he was told the consequences of that. So those are things that I think are going to, eventually come up, but it's a complicated issue.
Right. I agree. It's not an easy decision to be made, but it's something that you got to work on and not just arbitrarily say, well, you got a right not to testify, let the prosecution prove their case. Yeah, if you do 40 years in prison, you asserted your right to remain silent, but you didn't benefit from it. The people want to know so they don't feel tricked by your right to remain silent. It's just like when you ask your kid, what did they do this? And they're going, I don't have to answer this. You got to answer me. You got to answer me, son. And I'm sorry, I'm old school, but that's the way.
But I agree with you, Milton. Even though you're going to have a lot of the standard jury instructions that the criminal defendants right not to testify cannot be held against him, and the judge is going to say that over and over and over again. It's going to be emphasized in the jury instructions before the jury makes a decision. But I think you're right, Milton, that that is true. But as a practical matter, sometimes the jurors are going to want to hear from the defendant. And as the attorney, you got to really carefully examine the facts of your particular case, the jury pool, the judge, all these things. And, you have to really consider that. And then making sure that you have an informed decision.
Yeah,
and there's some really, disheartening information about the judge in terms of, the comments of the judge. And I think he ended up getting recused. And that just goes to the questions and comments that we've been making on this podcast about just the importance of voting, and not only voting for, your mayor, but also voting for your trial court judges. And you can rely upon many of our, African-American legal organizations. Some of them have rating systems, talking with local attorneys in terms of, judges that are not fair, and exercising your vote so that we have a more fair and more just judicial system.
Yeah, a fight is not a Mike Tyson event all the time. It's hard I've had Samoan clients weighing 400 pounds admitting in the end, I was scared. I was afraid because my wife was in there crying and I was afraid. This young man I represent in Illinois, I tried to give up. And I said, I give. And the officer turned me around and started beating me. And I said, man, stop hitting me. He went for his gun. And I grabbed the gun and I was afraid. I didn't know I shot him 5 times. You have got to talk about and accept that I'm afraid so that the hearer, the listener, the jury, and the judge will see that human quality there. But if you don't say anything, the assumption is you just were a willing participant in a fight and you're a badass and you Mike Tyson, and they can assume all kinds of things. So only way I don't believe that or have something to go against that is tell me how you felt at this time. You know, were you blind by rage? Were you blind by fear? What are you feeling? And I guarantee you most time that 2 men are in a fight, most of the time, they both scared as hell. And it's a blurred vision kind of a situation. And you're not always totally responsible for, I did this and I did this and I did this. It just go on robotic state. The brain just works like that. So that's my experience in life in law.
Let me put this in context as to the decision-making process so the audience can understand. Under our rules of evidence, when you try a case, if the defendant takes a stand, certain things that he had done during his life may be admissible, but most things aren't. And the biggest thing that would be admissible is that if the suspect or the defendant had committed robbery, rape, or perjury, right? But most other crimes or bad acts are not admissible in most jurisdictions under the federal rules. So when back in the days when I did criminal cases, Milton, I always had my defendant testify and they were always acquitted. The reason being is that when you do a trial, the jury going to focus on what would be the worst part of your case. I always thought that if you did not have a defensive response to it, that you lose a point at trial that you can never recover from, and more than likely your client will be found guilty. So unless my client had a record that will be admissible, and under our trial rules, you can exclude out most evidence about him by simply filing what's called a motion limine. Now, another thing, though, his state of mind, Milton, what you were talking about, is so important that most people overlook. I didn't file that case because I had 2 trials myself that I was doing during this time period that were more significant to me and my client than that case because I didn't know the kid. But here's the situation. When the defendant result in the death, the defendant could also talk about what Milton talked about, state of mind, right? So if the opponent, most of the time, these athletes know each other, they know their reputation, and because now the track meets are covered on YouTube and things like that. So when you have a bad apple, the kids know about it. So when the defendant takes a stand that Milton will talk about, he can explain his prior knowledge of why this was such an aggressive confrontation. And I think that that's important. Now, I didn't see the trial, I didn't watch the transcript, but what I'm saying is that I just think that in most of these cases, when particular a case like this, that you have to put the defendant on the stand and file a motion limine to keep out anything that bad. But even if you have 1 or 2 incidents that the jury get to hear, you get to explain it in voir dire or jury selection process. Right. So you get rid of the jurors. I mean, I have it all the time. I had a jury member in one of my recent trials said something that would have been, I had a client that was walked a certain way. And this juror says that if you're on your cell phone, you're at fault as a pedestrian. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? You're on your cell phone? What about earplugs and stuff like that? So one juror think that if a pedestrian have an accident with a car and on the cell phone. So the point I'm making is that you get rid of those jurors. Yeah. Okay, now we have a bunch of callers. Let's take a couple calls. Next caller, go ahead, caller. Is that Pierre? Go ahead, Pierre.
Good morning, everybody. You hear me well?
Yes.
I got my points down. I'm gonna run through them real fast. And the first point was for Nate, and you can delve into this when you get more information, because one of the local attorneys here, Kenneth J. Allen, has filed a class action against NIPSCO for failure to maintain the vegetation and the trees up there, which caused a lot of the power lines to come down. And another astute young lady on Instagram has posted a video talking about Blackstip, 20% stake in NIPSCO that Blackstone took, which and then NIPSCO asked for a bunch of rate increases that negatively impacted or unfairly impacted the folk in Gary. And so hopefully Mr. Allen will be taking care of that issue, but keep an eye on that. But what I wanted to talk to Milton and Vanita about, the LA mayor's race out there, and I think Karen Bass, Mayor Bass, did an excellent job of shutting down Raman when she talked about this lady on the council schedules meetings that she doesn't even go to. And so to me, it was clear who should be the mayor of LA. I think it's Miss Bass. One last point that we talked about this some weeks ago, and I thought Carmelo Anthony was guilty as homemade sin. But then after I heard this additional information about Austin Metcalf's background, this is a horrible, horrible individual. And for the life of me, I don't know why, and I think you guys just explained it, but why none of that stuff was ever brought up. And I remember the late Johnny Cochran talking about, had he not brought up race in the O.J. Simpson case, he would have been guilty of malpractice. For the life, and then that's another aspect of the law that a lot of people don't understand. These backdoor deals and this talking between prosecutors and the judge and all of this stuff, all of that stuff goes on. And so now you're sitting there and your client, he probably has no idea of all of these backdoor communications and these agreements and everything. And then you end up with a conviction and you're going to prison. But to me, this young man's attorney, his conduct was nothing short of outrageous, and he probably should be investigated and disbarred if possible. And that's all I want to say. Thank you for taking my call.
You see how, Pierre, you said your position about Anthony was he was outrageous and it was guilty and he should be found guilty until you heard the other side of the picture. You heard more, and now you've changed your position. That happens in life, just as Mayor Bass was very supported by most of us, but according to Friday's front page headline in the California section of the LA Times, Mayor loses this round. They said Ramon kicked her butt in a debate Wednesday, I think it was, where Mayor Bass went after her about petty things, about personal things. And Ramon, who usually would have been baited by that, just stood back and took the higher ground and dealt with the issues that they were dealing with and made Bass look like a, quote, fool. I wasn't there. I don't know whether this reporter, his name is Arellano, is a supporter of Ramon, the competitor of Mayor Bass or not. But everybody don't think she is ahead right now as far as dealing with the issues of homelessness and other issues that are mainstream here in LA. So they're my 2 cents.
Okay, next caller, go ahead.
Hi, this is Renee from New York. Can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the Gary, Indiana case, I thought there was a surplus in Indiana, a financial surplus. So why isn't the governor using that surplus to help the people in Gary? That's one question. Second thing, on the Carmelo Anthony case, I really wanted to talk about this because I wanted to hear your viewpoints on it as attorneys. I don't understand for the life of me who these parents are. There is no way I would have been okay with and I know the son is grown, so maybe he made those decisions and the parents didn't have a lot to do with it. But I just wouldn't have been okay without that information coming out. These boys, these twins were a menace to society. Had they been black twins, that stuff would have certainly have come out. These white boys were a menace to society, and nobody held them accountable. They got pass after pass after pass after pass until it got to a point they ran into the wrong black kid who probably was afraid. Everybody knew their reputation, and I'm sorry that happened to him. But this, again, is Texas, and I'm hoping that he gets a new trial, because if he doesn't, hell's going to break loose behind this.
Hey, Renee,
Yeah.
Renee, there's one thing you need to know that's missing here, and this is very important. I've tried 193 jury trials. This is very important for people to understand. Even if your client doesn't take the stand, you can still get the same evidence in through a third-party witness. So you got 50 guys on the track team, probably about all of them know about this guy's history. So even if you don't want to put your client on the stand, you can still get the evidence in to evidence. In other words, you have to just go out and do your homework as a lawyer. You interview witnesses and you put on the same case as the defense. So you can answer as to why that this interaction occurred through a third party who's not subject to the impeachment type cross-examination. So I want to keep that in mind for the folks that are listening to this, because we had this debate about whether or not he should testify. I'm saying, so, okay, even if it doesn't testify, you can still get the evidence in of the misconduct of the other kid by properly investigating the case.
It was my—
Thank you, Attorney Lee. That was my thought too. I was like, you didn't have to put Carmela on the stand. I'm sorry, Attorney Banks, you were saying something.
Oh, not at all. Great point, Attorney Lee and Renee. My reading suggests that there was character evidence that could have been introduced on both sides, but as a result of this, quote, gentleman's agreement, the parties agreed not to introduce that evidence for whatever reason. Let me say that the judge will issue a ruling on this issue, on this request for a new trial on Monday. So I'm sure next week we'll have a lot more to discuss regarding this case.
One last thing, and then I'm going to hang up. I'm so glad they removed that judge to make a decision on whether or not there's going to be a new trial. They put another judge in place. I think that's appropriate. I don't think that judge should get to retire with full benefits. I don't think that attorney should not have charges brought against them or something on their record for misconduct or poor representation or whatever is done with attorneys. That it's such a poor job. But that's all I'm going to say. Thank you so much. And I love my Mayor Mondani. Have a great.
Okay, so for the record, character evidence in criminal case is information about a person's moral standard or traits like honesty or peacefulness. So under federal rule, the prosecution cannot introduce bad character traits to prove a defendant acting that way and committed a crime. However, important exception allows the defendant to introduce good character traits first. So, in other words, you should move to introduce things that show prior accidents of misconduct of aggressiveness on the part of the decedent, in my opinion. So this is my 2 cents, but I did not follow the case at all.
I've had jurors that come to me and said, he should have killed that so-and-so.
Yeah.
Several murder cases.
There are so many topics we didn't get to today, and we only got a couple minutes left. But there's one thing that bothered me was the ABA give certification to law schools. And we have a recent attack, and I need to do alert to the public. We have the lowest number of Black lawyers entering the profession now than we've had since I've been a lawyer. And there have been a dramatic decrease in enrollment of Black law students. It's becoming catastrophic. I think people don't realize how significant of a problem this is. Currently, Black lawyers underrepresent the population of minorities in our country. We're probably the lowest minorities. Black lawyers are less than 5% of lawyers in America, Hispanics about 6%, Asian about 7%. And the reason that's important is that we're probably, 14% population or whatever it is. And so we're underrepresented, and it makes a big distinction in our legal system. One final comment for everybody before we close.
Well, I think diversity is so important. Many of the people on the panel remember Council Legal Education Opportunity Program, CLEO, and the whole idea was to increase the number of attorneys that are color that are practicing law. And under this administration's view, just a program like that, in their view, is discriminatory, trying to find, other people that are qualified. So it's something they really have to pay attention to in terms of these broad strokes about DEI being improper. Just casting a wide net, in their view, is improper. And that kind of goes to the issue in terms of what these law schools are trying to do, and the administration pushing back against that.
The law is one of the least diverse professions, and the administration through the Department of Education has recommended that the American Bar Association no longer be the accrediting entity for law firms in this country, a role that they've played since 1952. And it's on the basis of at least the refusal so far of the Council on Legal Education and Admissions to the Bar, although they've suspended their diversity requirements there's a diversity accrediting rule for law schools, and that rule has been suspended since last year. It's my understanding that the council is scheduled to vote on its full repeal on September 8th. So coming up in a couple weeks. And this is as a result of the ABA taking the position that the council is in violation of federal laws and standards relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as that it has conflicts of interest and is not operating independently from the ABA member association. So we'll see what happens.
Milton?
It's not always relevant, but I can tell you, I believe in the majority of circumstances, race matters, whether it's in representation, whether it's in a juror or whatever, race does matter. So we have got to be conscious of that, and got to increase the involvement of Blacks in the field of law because it matters.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, our audience, and we'll talk to you next Saturday. Please join us. Until then, stay safe.
Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.